How does the quarterback battle dictate the Florida Gators' success for 2026?
You are Locked On Gators, your daily podcast on the Florida Gators. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Joining me now for Locked On Gators is Will Miles of Read and Reaction and Gators Breakdown. And Will, it's been a while since you've been on the show here. One thing that has happened in that time span is that the Florida Gators have a quarterback battle that is like I'm sorry to be the jerk, 20 seconds into this. But it is not a quarterback battle I'm super excited about. Gonna be honest with you, and everybody else. What's your take on Aaron Philo versus Tramell Jones, which is, by the way, the battle of the two quarterbacks no one knows anything really about with enough of a sample size, but everyone has a hard opinion on who the QB1 should be.
Yeah, I mean, I think so. My approach has always been to look at guys where you don't have a track record and look at their high school track record to try to figure out what you're going to get. I feel like that's, and I've really kind of gone back and looked at, probably 100 or 200 high school kids and like the top 50 to 100 recruits usually is where you're looking there. But, how did it translate? Completion percentage, yards per attempt, those sorts of things. It usually translates pretty good. The other thing that translates really well is their ability to run. And so to me, the thing that people are missing when they're looking at the Philo versus Jones debate is the rushing attack. And so if you look at the college stats, or I'm sorry, the high school stats for Philo, 228 rush attempts for 1,200 yards, so 5.3 an attempt. You look at it for Tramell Jones, 56 for 356, 6.4 per attempt. So you might say, from a yards per attempt perspective, Tramell Jones is a more effective runner, but Philo was a more willing runner in high school. And then you start looking at it in college. And again, Philo was somebody who Buster Faulkner used to run the ball, so 2024 and 2025, he didn't play a ton, but 16 rushes for 95 yards, 5.9 per rush versus Tramell Jones, 8 for 10 in 2025, right? And so a lot of times I find that those rushing yards aren't necessarily just because the guy has more speed or because he's a little bit more elusive, though sometimes that's it. I find it's actually like a sack avoidance strategy. It says something about how quickly someone processes information, says something about how often they go to the right guy where they're not having to double clutch, those sorts of things. Now, I will say that my faith in Philo has been a little bit challenged by some of the interceptions I've seen in the spring game in particular. And then, some of the stuff that we've seen coming out of practice. So I don't think it's a perfect solution. I think, one of the things we did, we cited you in our preseason magazine, something you'd written up over at Swamp Signal. And, you'd highlighted arm strength and deep off platform throws as Philo's main limitation. I mean, that's it, right? And so the corners and the safeties are going to be able to creep up if he's the starter. So you're going to have to find other ways to get guys to move side to side, or you're just going to have to take the shots deep, and maybe you're going to miss them from time to time, or maybe some gadget plays. I don't know whether I haven't done my homework to know whether any of the wide receivers are former quarterbacks. Like maybe we can run a reverse that isn't that garbage play that Billy Napier runs where the wide receiver can hit a deep one. Or maybe you bring them both out on the field because Jones definitely does throw a better deep ball, right? So I think Faulkner's going to have to get a little creative because both guys have limitations. But if you had to ask me today, who do I think starting? It's Philo, and it's not because he's got more reps in this system. It's not because he knows Buster Faulkner. It's because Faulkner specifically and realistically, most coaches who have the ability to can extend drives and make sure that you basically guarantee yourself 30 points a game if you've got a quarterback who isn't a net negative in the running game. And so, that's why Dan Mullen has always been so successful in offense. I'm actually working on something right now for Lane Kiffin, and you sort of see the same thing. When he went to Alabama, he all of a sudden changed and had Blake Sims and Jalen Hurts. And then when he went to Ole Miss, adopted the same sort of theory, and same thing at FAU, always had somebody who could run the ball out of the quarterback position. And so that's why I think Philo is going to get the shot. It's because I think Faulkner understands that when you've got two guys with limitations and you don't have somebody with a howitzer who's going to complete 70% of his throws, you better have somebody who's not going to take a sack, who's going to make the right read, who's going to allow you to live to hand the ball on 1st and 10 to Jadan Baugh again. As opposed to, being off the field because all of a sudden it's 2nd and 14 because you took a sack and now you're way behind the chains and you just don't have the ability to catch up to them.
Yeah. Sack avoidance is a thing where I live by sacks for a quarterback stat. I think pressures are an offensive line stat, sacks are a quarterback stat. Whether that's evading with your legs, throwing the ball away, getting the ball out, whatever it is. But I do like that you mentioned Philo's legs there, because I don't think he's the more athletic of the two, but I do think he's the better runner. I think that's what you talk about, where especially when you watch his film at Georgia Tech, there's a couple of times where he'll keep the ball, run right up the middle. I think there was I think it was the Gardner Webb game. We saw him keep it on like jet power read and just run right through and pick up the first down. But picking up the first down is the thing that I think is the biggest advantage as well, or second outside of sack avoidance, where, by the way, Ben Johnson with the Chicago Bears was like, oh, I'd rather you throw a pick than take a sack at this point, because taking a sack just kills the whole drive anyway. And so at least if you throw a pick, we're closer to getting the ball back and making a play there, which is insane to hear, but it is, I guess, how some coaches are approaching this, which again, it's wild. Coaches are weird, but hey, they get paid millions of dollars to do it. But I do think using your legs to pick up the first down is also incredibly important for this offense. Just at least give yourself a shot, right? I mean, everybody knows Kyle Trask was not a great runner, was not an athletic quarterback, but we also saw plenty of times where Dan Mullen's like, all right, if we come out an empty set and the defense gives us numbers in the box, we're running QB draw, QB power, whatever the hell it is. And it's one of those things where, like, hey, you don't have to be really athletic to be effective as a rusher. And I think that that's also where it just becomes being more willing to essentially just put your life on the line out there to go pick up a first down or whatever it is. And I do think that that's where Philo goes. I think he'll be the starter. My personal preference is Tramell Jones as far as just throwing the football. I do think that not being able to properly and consistently stretch the field is terrifying. But at the same time, like I've said before, like my thought process here is just like, we've seen them throw 130, 140 passes combined in their career so far. Only one quarterback has thrown passes against an FBS team last year, because Philo only threw passes against Gardner Webb. Like, I just feel like this isn't an awesome spot to be in, where you're like, hey, we have two quarterbacks, kind of crapshoot in either direction, no matter who you pick if you're Florida. I would like to ask, though, win total wise, how do you feel that having a Philo or a Jones impacts? Like, do you think it's a significant part of saying, hey, completing 70% of your passes and being a rushing threat is worth the trade-off of, or I guess we'll say the potential trade-off of explosive plays, and that it'll lead to more wins, especially as we talk about year one right now?
Well, I mean, I think it's a great question from the standpoint of, I think Faulkner has to decide, how is this team best equipped in order, like, how is this team best equipped to score, right? And so if that means getting the ball to a guy underneath and letting him go, and that's where you get your like, he's gonna have to scheme explosives. I actually think so. In the preseason magazine that Nick Newts and I put out every year, we have an entire feature on the offensive line. And one of the things is, if you go back and look at the PFF scores, which talk about like an every play rating for offensive lines, it turns out Florida's offensive line played better based on PFF scores than Georgia Tech's did. But if you look at the overall yards per attempt, you look at EPA, all the different stats for rushing, Georgia Tech was a hell of a lot better offense rushing the ball. And so if you start looking deeper, the benefit came from, they were able to get explosives in the run game. And so that's where I think Faulkner's going to have to make his determination. Most teams try to be efficient in the run game and then explosive in the passing game. And the question I have for Faulkner is he going to have to go the other way, right? Is he going to have to find the guy who's most efficient in the passing game so that he can be explosive in the running game with Jadan Baugh that he's got back there, right? And I'm guessing Baugh did not come cheap. I'm guessing that convincing him to stay was a significant effort. And so they're going to have to make sure that they take that Lamborghini out of the garage and build the explosive plays for him. So I think in year one, I think Faulkner is going to value efficiency at the quarterback position. And so what I mean by that is, like, if you think about success rate, right? Like on first down, that's like just gaining 50% of the yards needed. So if you get a 5-yard sack and it's 1st and 15 versus a little 5-yard run, it's 1st and 5, you're in a much better position to give the ball on 2nd and 5 to Jadan Baugh and have that one more opportunity to bust that explosive. And that is one of the things that starts opening up if the quarterback is a running threat. That defensive end, especially if you're running read option, has to stay for that guy. If he's going to go around the edge, that frees up, the running back on a safety, and all of a sudden you can bust a big play. So I think what's going to probably end up happening is that they're going to identify who their playmakers are. They're going to find a way to get it to them in space. Like, people who didn't like Billy Napier's screens all over the place are probably going to have some complaints, especially early on with Faulkner, because that's what he's gonna have to do if he's got Philo as the quarterback. Is he's just not going to be able to, like, chuck the ball down the field like you would if you had Danny Werfel back there. But that's just the reality, right? Like, these guys are limited. I understand why people would look at Tramell Jones and some of the throws he made in the spring game and say, okay, like, we can build on that. But I also kind of made that mistake last year with DJ Lagway, where I said, okay, he can hit those throws downfield. We can build on that. And it turns out every 3rd and 8, when they needed to hit a ball in between two guys in a zone, they couldn't do it. And so that's the place where Tramell Jones is going to have to show. He's going to have to show that he can be efficient enough that the explosiveness is worth it. And likewise, I think Philo is going to have to show that he can be explosive enough that the efficiency is worth it. And we're sort of talking about 6 of one, half a dozen of the other for either of these guys, most likely. But I do think it suggests that the guy that they pick is the guy they're going to have to go with, because it's not plug and play, right? Like, if Philo gets hurt, are you really going to come in and run the exact same play design and play? Like, your run sheet's going to change completely when you change guys. And so that'll be, it won't just be Steve Spurrier pulling guys in and out, and running the exact same plays over and over and over again. I think they're going to have to adjust depending upon who's in there. So that is the risk with Philo, right? If he runs a lot, gets hurt, well, now all of a sudden you got to change midstream. And have you had time to do that, right? Have you had the ability to build everything in? And, like, before we came on here, you were talking about the offensive line. That's certainly an area of concern too, which also means sack avoidance and making decisions quickly becomes a premium as well.
Yeah. I will say one thing you mentioned earlier was the screens, and that a bunch of people that would get frustrated with the Napier screens might dislike it early on. I disagree on that, only because I think they're actually going to be competent executing them this time around. I wrote about this last season, was that Florida was incredibly bad executing screens. And they sucked at it. And I do think that they were poorly coached at actually timing up the blocking. Like, you watch the Kansas City Chiefs, and they've always been great at throwing screens. And it's because Andy Reid is a fantastic coach for setting that up. And I think that Florida under Napier was terrible at it because they were poorly coached running there. Speaking of poorly coached teams, we're going to talk about a good coach team or a well-coached team. The biggest stage in world soccer is here, and every match feels like it has the potential for a memorable moment. One goal can completely change the energy of a game, shift momentum, and alter the outcome in an instant. That's what makes tournament soccer so exciting. From the opening whistle to the final kick, now FanDuel is giving fans another reason to stay locked into every match with every goal pays. Bet on the match and get bonus bets for every goal scored in that match. More goals means more bonus bets. All you have to do is turn on your token. From the opening whistle to the final kick, let there be goals on FanDuel. Visit FanDuel.com to get started now. Or a great coach, we'll say. Kurt Signetti, Jon Sumrall. I know that there's some people who they kind of like the I don't want to say parallel. I really don't. I don't want to say parallel because I don't think that they're necessary, parallels, because Signetti went from FCS to FBS with James Madison, and then went to Indiana and beat ass for the entire time while he was there. Like, there's just no other, or for the 2 years that he's been there so far. And there are a few parallels there. I will say one of my favorite things about it, not that we necessarily have to talk much about the portal or anything, but was they brought in a bunch of guys that had multiple years in college, and still have 2 years of eligibility remaining, or 2 or more years of eligibility remaining. And that was one of my favorite things about it, because that is a thing that Kurt Cignetti did. I know a lot of his portal players did come from James Madison with him, and so they were basically an extension of his high school class at that point. But I do think there's that I'm going to call it badassery parallel between Cignetti and Sumrall, where it's like dudes just win, right? Like Kurt Cignetti got to Indiana and he's like, I win. Google me. And Jon Sumrall shows up to Florida and he's like, hey, winners win. I'm a winner. We're gonna win. How do you feel about the? I'm gonna say, because also everybody now is trying to compare every coach to Cignetti at this point, of like, especially like doing more with less, I guess we'll say. So how do you feel kind of about that? And I know that you of course wrote about it in the magazine, Reading Reaction, which by the way, the link is in the description below, if you want to go order that. And if you haven't ordered it yet, idiot.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I think the comparison to Cignetti is half true. I think if you look at Sumrall's career, his defenses have taken major steps forward from where they were the year before to when he takes over. There's a pretty significant jump on defense. You see the same thing with Cignetti. The thing that you don't see with Sumrall is you don't see some giant, just earth-shattering leap on offense. And one of the things we highlighted in the magazine, and I actually broke it down by school, is that he's had 5 different transfer quarterbacks in his time at JMU and Indiana. Their QB rating before they played for him was 133, after 173. And so I'm writing something about, or I'm working on something right now with Lane Kiffin. And, so for QB rating, 145 is kind of average for FBS, maybe a little bit lower than that, maybe like 143. Like if you got a guy who's like 155, 160, that's a guy who you're like, you can't quite pinpoint why he annoys you, like, because he makes a lot of good plays, but there's just something missing just a little bit. It's kind of, I call it Jake Fromm, like that's that guy. Once you get up over 170, you're slinging it all over the place. So Lane Kiffin, in all of his years coaching quarterbacks, has had 2 quarterbacks with a QB rating over 170. Cignetti has done it the last 2 years, and
Yep.
Mendoza was at 183 this past year. So if you want to tell me that Florida is going to take a jump like Indiana took a jump, then that means that Buster Faulkner is going to get a significant, like he's going to have a quarterback with a rating of 175, 185, somewhere in that range, which means you're talking 40 touchdowns, 5 picks, averaging 8 or 9 yards a throw, And so if you think that can happen, okay. And it's not just QB rating. If you look at like PFF rating, 70.6 the year before he takes over. So about 70% of the time the quarterback's making the right play, 89.0 for those 5 transfer quarterbacks the year after they start working under Cignetti. So they're just better, right? They're better on a per play basis. They're better on an efficiency perspective. They're better from an explosivity perspective. And that is where Cignetti really puts his fingerprint, and quite honestly took advantage of some of the crap schedule that Indiana had that first year, where, you just outscore the guys you're playing. And, and it gave him the opportunity to build into the second year. And that's really where you see the difference. So I think it's more apropos to compare Sumrall to Saban and Smart. Right, Saban comes into Alabama, goes 7-6 his first year. Year 2, he's in the SEC championship game. Kirby Smart comes in, takes over a team that won 10 games with Mark Richt. The year before he comes in, goes 8-5, had a couple of really bad losses, including one against Tennessee, where like there were like multiple Hail Marys and all sorts of crazy clock management. And I came up with something I called the Kirby Award that I gave to people who mismanaged the clock, and then he started winning national championships right when I came up with that. But the next year, he's in the SEC championship game. Right. And I think so. Year 2, what we saw from Cignetti last year is what you see from great coaches. What we saw from Cignetti in year 1 is unique, and it's unique to his ability to coach up the quarterback. So I think it's great that Sumrall has recognized that he needs to get an elite offensive coordinator. I think the question is, given the guys they have on the roster, are they able to see that sort of jump? I mean, now look, we're talking about Ben DiNucci and Jordan McLeod and Curtis Rourke. right? So like those are guys who coming in, like I guarantee you and I, if we'd have been covering Indiana and said Curtis Rourke is coming in here, great. Is he going to do an awesome job at Indiana? He might be better. Is he going to be damn near a Heisman candidate? Like we would have been like, no. And so, that's something we don't know about Faulkner. We obviously saw him do a great job with Haynes King at Georgia Tech, not necessarily an efficiency basis on the QB rating, but enough in the running game to make the offense efficient. I think that's probably what we'll see with Philo. But to me, it's a poor comparison because of the history with quarterbacks that Cignetti has, and it's unique. Like most coaches do not automatically sprinkle fairy dust on bad quarterbacks and they become fantastic. And I mean, Mendoza, QB rating of 144 at Cal the year before, right? So he was average. And all of a sudden he goes to Indiana and he's winning the Heisman Trophy. So that's something very specific to Cignetti that I think people overlook when they make those comparisons is he's not just like incrementally improving the offense. He's taking the offense to a level that, you're talking like Ohio State level offenses. You're talking, old school Florida offenses under Urban Meyer, like those sorts of explosivity, which is pretty unique to be able to do as an offensive coordinator. So anyway.
Yeah. I will say I knew who Curtis Rourke was going into Indiana only because of the MAC and that is it. But I did not think that Curtis Rourke was going to do what Curtis Rourke did at Indiana. And just for comparison purposes, Haynes King at Texas A&M, 116 passer rating in 2022. Then Georgia Tech had 142.2. 2024 had 154.6. And then last year had 147.9. But like you mentioned, the efficiency came from his legs there.
Yeah.
And so,
again, that's a guy with limited ability through the air, right? And certainly limited ability to get the ball out quickly and get it in between zones and those sorts of things. But Faulkner was able to find a way to make it useful. So, again, I look and I go, I think that Faulkner can do I think Faulkner can make this offense significantly better than it was last year. I think they can average 30 points a year. But Cignetti was averaging 40 points a year. And so, going from whatever the hell Florida scored last year to scoring 40 points, that ain't happening. It's just not, because of the conference, because of the schedule, because of the quarterbacks. And so again, I think it's like every coach is going to get compared to Cignetti, but I think it's probably more worthwhile to go back and say, okay, realistically, what we need to see is a well-prepared team. What we need to see is a quarterback who knows what he's doing. What we need to see is 11 guys on the field when they're special teams. What we need to see is like good sequencing of the plays, because you can talk about Napier's ability to coach the offense up and have them do the right thing, but a lot of the problem was predictability, right? That 3rd and 6, we knew the running play was coming to set up 4th and 3. And 3rd and 3, we knew the running play was coming to set up 4th and 1, and then on 4th and 1, we knew it was a double slant, or they were going to run spacing on 3rd and 7 when they needed to. It was like you knew what was coming because of the way they sequenced their plays. And I do think that Faulkner will bring some unpredictability, even with some of the limitations that the guys have on the offensive side of the ball.
Yeah, I feel like every time we talk about the Napier offense, it kind of just pisses me off a little bit. And I will say this also, because we were having this conversation in a Twitter space yesterday at the time of recording this yesterday, by the time you guys listened to this 2 days ago. But Florida in 2025 had Florida in 2025 had 17 points per game in SEC play. And 21 points total. And that was just embarrassing, to say the least. I think we can throw that out there. Embarrassing is, I think, as much as I can say without losing my job for swearing there. But I will also say, because and I wanted to talk about this with you, because we talked about this with Nick when he was on the show a few weeks ago at this point. Where the read and reaction predictions that you guys did, you had Florida going 7-5. That's I kind of think it's a 7 or 8 wins. I think right now FanDuel has a line set at 7.5, and I think that's about as fair as you can get for Florida. Florida Atlantic Campbell, obvious wins. The Auburn game is one that I would like to talk a little bit about here. Just because like it fascinates me the parallels between these two programs right now, of just, two teams that changing the head coach this offseason, that Florida and Auburn had gone at it quite a bit on the recruiting trail. Not so much last year, but in prior years, they'd gone at it quite a bit. This is going to be for both guys their first SEC game as a head coach in the SEC. They've obviously both played SEC opponents before, but first SEC game as a head coach in the SEC. Jon Sumrall was rumored, I'm gonna say, for the Auburn job before Florida took over there. You have that game as a toss-up. I also have that game as a toss-up. I'll say Florida lean is where I'm going. I would just like to hear your thoughts on that one before it actually happens, as everybody's starting to talk about it now because that's the first meaningful game that Florida has on the schedule.
Yeah, well, I mean, the good news for Florida is they should be pissed off because this is the same USF team that beat them last year. And so, I think from a talent perspective, Florida should win. I think Florida has significant advantages in a lot of different places, but Auburn and Jordan Hare has been a nightmare for Florida. Though, to be honest, anytime Florida goes outside of the state of Florida, it feels like it's been a nightmare. Right? I mean, as you go down it, you're like, well, at Mizzou a couple of weeks later, well, that's been a nightmare. It's because the game starts at 11 and nobody gives a crap by the time they get to that game, right? So, so here's what I would say. I would say if Sumrall wants to be long-term competitive, he's got to win this game. Like, I have it as a toss-up, but realistically, I've got Florida with 6 projected wins, 3 projected losses. The losses are Ole Miss, Georgia, and at Texas. And then I got a bunch of toss-ups in there. And so the reason I have them at 7 and 5 is I think they'll lose a couple of those toss-ups. I think they'll get one. I think the Auburn one is more important than the other ones, right? I think the Auburn one is because of what it means in terms of just like setting expectations for the program, selling the boosters, right? You go to Auburn and put the beat down on Golesh, and all of a sudden the boosters are like, we got our guy, right? And, you put a beat down on Florida Atlantic, you put a beat down on Campbell. It's like nobody's going to get all that excited. You go on the road and you win a game in a place where you haven't had a whole lot of success. And even in years when they won national championships, they have won the game in Auburn, right? And so this gives you an opportunity to do that. But I think the big thing for me is that Florida, like for all the things that we say bad about Billy Napier, and there's a lot, the overall talent for the team is better than the overall talent at Auburn. And so to me, the frustration with Napier was you would look at the talent and go, why isn't this team better? And so if you really are who we think you are, this is one where Sumrall, if he's got his team right, and if he's got his team following him and believing, and he's got them playing at peak capacity, they should beat Auburn, even though it's at Auburn, assuming there's not some ridiculous fumble call like they did against Leak years ago. But, this is one that I just, everybody's like, well, it's not a must win early in the year. I'm like, nah, it kind of is. Right.
I think it might be like the most must win game.
Well, I mean, my whole thing all throughout all these eras, whether it was Dan Mullen or Jim McElwain or Billy Napier, there are 2 things you got to do in college football as a head coach. You can sell hope and you can sell wins. And Sumrall has done an awesome job since he came in at selling hope. But you go out there and lay an egg in the plains, and all of a sudden the noise starts creeping up, and we are a famous and infamously, not very patient fan base. And the good news is Sumrall seems to be just as psychotic as some of us are, and will be chucking himself off a bridge if they go out unprepared. So I guess one of the reasons I'm setting this as the expectation is because I expect them to go out and play really well. Does that mean, but I'm sure the Auburn fans feel the same way, right? They're sitting there going, well, if Golesh is who we think he is, these schools are in the same spot. We should go out and take advantage. But I don't know. I don't know how you feel, but I just look at it and I say Florida has more talent. And so absolutely. Realistically, then it's a question of which coach has done a better job of utilizing his talent. And if Sumrall is going to win anything significant, then he and his coaches have to do a better job of utilizing their talent than Golish can, and they should win. Honestly, they should probably win by a touchdown. But again, I have this as a toss-up because I just don't know. Right? I have no idea whether the team's going to be prepared. I have no idea how bought in they'll be. I have no idea. It's not like Sumrall was winning games by 45 points at his previous stops, right? So one of the lessons I learned from Billy Napier was he had a ton of one-score wins at Louisiana. And the question is always, is he just really good at game managing, or is he allowing the games to be a one-score game? And I think we found out it was much more the latter than the former.
Oh, yeah.
So I don't know, man. I hope he throws on every 3rd and 6 and goes for every 4th and 1. Like if he does that, I'll be all right.
Yeah. I think one of the most entertaining things about this game is going to both of these coaches are absolute lunatics. They're both psychotic. So I'm really looking forward to that. Running a business shouldn't feel like you're trying to connect a bunch of systems that were never designed to work together. One app for accounting, another for inventory, another for sales, and somehow none of them talk to each other. That's where Odoo comes in. Odoo is an all-in-one business management software that brings every part of your business together in one powerful platform, from sales and accounting to inventory and marketing. Everything works in one place, helping your team move faster, stay organized, and focus on growing the business instead of just managing software. The best organizations know that success isn't just about talent, it's about having everyone working toward the same goal. And that's true in sports, just like it is in business. Like you can look and go ahead and see the New York Knicks. Yeah, I'm going to keep talking about them. My team just won a championship for the first time in my life. And you can see how Jalen Brunson took a pay cut so that they can have OG Anunoby, Karl Anthony Towns, Mikal Bridges, all there just to win because they got one goal. Win. And Josh Hart, my favorite. I don't know how I just left him off completely, but I think it's because he's just deep down in my soul, the New York Knicks. Great organizations win because operations matter, and that's why you should get Odoo. Try it for free today at odoo.com/lockedon. That's odoo.com/lockedon. I do think that Florida has more talent than Auburn. I honestly, I don't even think it's that much of a question. I know Auburn fans got on my ass about that a few weeks ago. But I was just
USF.
I know, that's what I said. That's what
USF did beat Florida last year, right?
Exactly, but this isn't Billy's Florida that's going to lose to teams like USF. Hopefully, I'm going to knock.
Better not be.
Yeah, I'm going to knock on wood on that one. But I do think that both of these coaches are psychos. So I'm really looking forward to just that. I feel like the energy is just going to be insane. One thing that does kind of concern me is that Auburn will have a Power 4 game under their belt by this time because they open the year against Baylor, and so I do think that they're going to at least have that Power 4 game under their belt. I do think about the insanity that would be if Auburn loses to Baylor and then beats Florida. That would be DJ Lagway beating Auburn when Florida couldn't beat Auburn. And that just feels like the most like Florida thing lately, because it kind of feels like, hey, what stupid thing can happen to Florida today? Well, guess what's happening today, buddy? And so it kind of feels like that. I do want to touch also before I let you go on the Ole Miss game, because you have that as an outright loss. I'm not pushing back on that. I'm just curious if it was purely talent, if it's buying into Pete Golding, whatever that might be for Florida. I mean, also a home game for Florida, dropping it against Ole Miss.
Yeah, so I am not bought into Golding. That's one of the reasons why I thought about making it a toss-up. I think that the jilted fans at Ole Miss are going to come to rue that Lane is not there anymore. Not necessarily because of what he's going to do at LSU right away, though maybe he will. I think it's going to be because of what he had at Ole Miss and what they don't necessarily have now. The reason that I picked them is for the most part, my picks are based on quarterback. My picks are based on, if I look at quarterback, which team has the better guy behind center throughout. And so, Texas, I think Manning is better. Georgia, I think Stockton is going to be better, though I don't think he's great. And I think Trinidad Chambliss at Ole Miss could be better, right? And so the ones that I picked as outright losses were ones where I went, the quarterbacks have a track record of being better players than what I expect Philo or Jones are going to be able to provide on a consistent basis. I will say that quarterback play in the SEC overall has been pretty crappy over the last couple of years. And one of the things that I highlighted in the magazine was that if you look at every playoff team last year, so I split up things into PPA on offense and PPA on defense and plotted it. And every playoff team except for Tulane was in the good offense, good defense category. But the SEC teams that made it were just barely in that good offense quadrant. And so, the reality is the reason they got whipped when they got to the playoffs is because they were deficient at the quarterback position. Everybody but Ole Miss, and Ole Miss played the best out of all the teams in the playoff.
Yeah.
And so, the Ole Miss game, the reason I'm partial to them in that particular setting is quarterback specifically. I think they're going to take a step back this year, though. I think this is one of those like Spurrier to Zook type things, right? Where, they tried to maintain continuity at Ole Miss, but I don't think continuity is going to replace, creativity, and it's going to replace the stuff that Kiffin brings to the table, including taking the heat while all those guys are sort of battling for the playoffs, right? I mean, if you remember Florida back in the Tebow era, that 2009 season was like miserable, right? They won the national championship in 2008, and then 2009, I think they beat Miami like 24-3, and everybody's like, why didn't you blow them out by more, right? And I think, that pressure starts to creep in on guys. And so the expectations for Ole Miss are playoffs or bust, and I'm not sure that Golding's going to get them there. And I think losing Kiffin is a huge deal. At the same time, I think Chambliss is a better quarterback than Philo or Jones. That's why I got that as a loss.
Yeah, I think Trinidad Chambliss might be the best college quarterback in the country. I don't think he's the best pro prospect in the country, but I think he's the best college quarterback in the country. I am a Pete Golding guy. I really do like him. Have always liked him. When we were talking about, what if Lane comes to Florida? Like, I was like, bring on Pete Golding. Like, I like him. I am a big fan of him. I like what he does defensively. But even then, it's like, I get it. You have coached in college football playoff games. I am proud of you for doing that. You have not coached a team through the off season. You have not coached a team through the summer, through fall camp. You have not done any of that. It was not your team that made it to the college football playoff. Which is why that's the reason I don't just give him he won a college football playoff game as a coach. Like, that's cool. You didn't do any of the things that gets that's like being a great playoff performer on a team like in we'll say the NFL, like being a great playoff performer on like the Giants where you make it once every 7 years, right? Like, it's like that's great that you're awesome in the playoffs, but you're never there. Like if you're not there, it doesn't matter.
Well, that's why the openers for Billy Napier were always so disappointing, right? You go out to Utah and you get waxed, or you play Miami and you get waxed, and you just don't look ready to go, right?
Yeah.
And so the problem isn't that you laid an egg. The problem is that you had all off season to make sure you didn't lay an egg, and then you laid an egg. And so, and now it's too late, right? I remember there was some story that came out. I think it must have been 2 years ago, where they like talked about a bye week, and they're like, "Oh, we actually practiced hard this week for the bye week," or we actually went ones on ones or something like that. And it's like, it's too late. Like, at that point, if you're going ones on ones, it's too late, right? And so Golding certainly has watched a lot of folks. I mean, he's watched Saban, he's watched Kiffin, so he's got his own, and he may be great, right? Like, he may be the next Signetti, who the hell knows, right? But he hadn't proven that yet. Yep. And so I think there's a lot to prove on his end. But again, I think Chambliss has proven what he can do at the quarterback position. And, one of the things that I like about Chambliss as a quarterback is he wasn't afraid to run the ball last year either. So that's maybe the question that I would ask for Ole Miss is, are they going to kind of put bubble wrap on him and say, well, we want to develop him as a pocket passer? And, just like we talked about earlier with Faulkner, like, you have to use the rushing game in order to get everything you want out of the offense. And if Golding and the staff there at Ole Miss doesn't do that in the same way Kiffin did, I think you could see Chambliss put up similar passing numbers with a much less efficient offense if they're not willing to use his legs.
Yeah, the thing that I loved about Ole Miss last year and Trinidad Chambliss specifically was he was in the most quarterback-friendly offense in the country with Lane Kiffin calling plays or Charlie Weiss Jr., whoever was doing it, because I know they kind of split duties depending on the tempo that they were going. And so he was in the most quarterback-friendly offense. It's going to be the same system because of John David Baker coming over from East Carolina. He was under Lane Kiffin, but doesn't mean he's going to be executing it and calling it the same way as Lane Kiffin, of course. But I thought that it was playing in such a quarterback-friendly offense, but being able to carry the offense when things broke down that made Trinidad Chambliss so great. Like his escapability is second to none in the country. And so I loved seeing that. And that was, to me, what made him so good. That's why I'm like, look, I think he's the best college quarterback pro prospect. Yeah, he's a little short. There is going to be questions about that. But the dude in college, going to be like, he's going to keep you at least competitive in just about every opportunity you give him. So I do think that Trinidad Chambliss is awesome. Pete Golding, think you're great too, but prove it on the field. That's all I can say about that one. Like, I've seen Trinidad Chambliss coach or play. I haven't seen Pete Golding coach a team through the season to this
He's
point.
the same place Sumrall's at, except the expectations are win a national championship, right?
Yeah.
Golding's either going to deliver or it is going to be a massive disappointment. That's some pressure both on the players and the coach, right? It's a unique situation for him coming into there, and especially if Lane has some early success at LSU and Ole Miss stumbles a little bit. Oh boy, that'll be kind of fun to see.
Yeah, that right the week before Florida plays Ole Miss is LSU at Ole Miss, and I do think that maybe the emotional hangover is also a conversation to have there about that game. But I mean, I'm just looking forward to the dog fight that one's going to be. Like the energy there is going to be absolutely insane.
A couple personal fouls in that one early on.
Oh yeah, at least a couple. I think if you don't make this like longest yard, like first play, we're setting the tone, then I don't even know what the hell you're doing out there.
I'm Sean Marino, man.
Yeah, I'm exactly. I'm taking the 15 if I got to. Like I'm letting you know what it is right here. But thank you so much, Will. This is Will Miles with the Ready Reaction and Gators Breakdown. I appreciate you so much for joining me on Locked On Gators. And again, we got the link in the description below for the preseason magazine. If you don't order it, you're an idiot. Is all I can tell you.
Thanks for having me on, man. I appreciate it.